So, hello friends, my name is Nikhil and today I'm going to tell you a story which will make you think. So let's start. Long before his name became synonymous with fraud and deception across India, Natwarlal was simply Mithilesh Kumar Srivastava, a boy born in a small village near Siwan in the state of Bihar. The dusty roads, modest homes, and close-knit community of his childhood offered little hint that he would one day become one of the most notorious con artists in Indian history. As a child, Mithilesh was remarkably intelligent. Teachers often praised his sharp memory and quick understanding of complex subjects. While many children struggled with arithmetic, he could solve difficult calculations in his head. His curiosity extended beyond the classroom, and he developed an early fascination with how businesses, money, and legal systems worked. His academic achievements earned him respect in the community. He studied commerce and later pursued law, an unusual accomplishment for someone from his background during that era. Family members believed he was destined for a respectable career as a lawyer, government official, or businessman. But beneath the image of a promising student, a different mindset was beginning to take shape. According to accounts that later emerged, a family dispute involving a loan became a turning point in his life. The incident left him feeling humiliated and resentful. He believed that powerful people could manipulate financial systems, while ordinary individuals suffered the consequences. Whether this experience truly pushed him towards crime or merely provided an excuse for choices he would later make remains uncertain. What is clear is that the young man began viewing rules not as boundaries to obey, but as obstacles that could be exploited. One evening, while studying legal documents and financial records, he noticed something that fascinated him. "A signature is just handwriting," he reportedly remarked to a friend. The friend laughed. "Not when it's on a bank document." Mithilesh smiled. "That's exactly what everyone believes." The idea stayed with him. Over the following months, he spent countless hours practicing handwriting. He copied signatures from letters, official forms, and financial documents. At first, the results were poor. The lines looked shaky and unnatural, but he was patient. Again and again he practiced. Soon, he could imitate another person's signature so accurately that even careful observers struggled to spot differences. It was a skill that would eventually make him famous and feared. His first major fraud allegedly involved a local moneylender. Faced with financial pressure, Mithilesh forged a bank check to settle a debt. The day he presented the forged document, his heart raced. The moneylender examined the check carefully. For a few tense seconds, silence filled the room. Then the man nodded. "It seems genuine." The transaction was completed. Mithilesh walked away with a feeling he had never experienced before. It wasn't merely relief, it was confidence. For the first time, he realized that intelligence could be used not only to succeed within the system, but also to manipulate it. That realization changed everything. Most criminals rely on force, intimidation, or violence. Natwarlal would rely on something far more powerful: illusion. As the years passed, he transformed himself into a master observer of human behavior. He carefully studied how wealthy businessmen spoke, how government officials carried themselves, and how bureaucrats interacted with the public. He learned that authority was often a performance. People obeyed uniforms, they trusted official documents, they respected confidence, and most importantly, they rarely questioned someone who appeared important. Mithilesh began experimenting with different identities. One day he would dress like a government inspector. Another day he would appear as a senior bureaucrat. On some occasions, he presented himself as a representative of powerful ministries. Witnesses later described his ability to change personalities as astonishing. He could alter his accent depending on the region. He could imitate the speech patterns of politicians. He could forge official seals and documents. Even his walk changed according to the role he was playing. If he wanted to appear as a senior government officer, he walked with measured confidence. If he posed as a wealthy businessman, he adopted a more relaxed and commanding presence. The transformation was so convincing that many educated people never suspected they were dealing with an imposter. But Natwarlal's greatest weapon was not his forgery skills, it was his understanding of greed. He recognized a simple truth about human nature. Most people believe they cannot be fooled. and those who dream of easy money are often the easiest to deceive. Rather than targeting honest citizens, he frequently focused on individuals seeking shortcuts to wealth. Businessmen hoping for secret deals, investors looking for extraordinary profits, and officials willing to bend rules often became his preferred victims. He knew exactly what they wanted to hear. There's a special government contract available. A valuable property can be purchased below market price. A rare opportunity exists, but it must remain confidential. Again and again, people listened. Again and again, they believed. And again, they lost their money. By the time authorities began noticing his activities, the young man from Bihar had already evolved into something far more dangerous than an ordinary fraudster. He had become a master of deception, a man capable of convincing strangers to trust him within minutes. A man could forge documents that appeared authentic, a man who understood human weaknesses better than many psychologists. And soon, his confidence would grow so immense that he would attempt scams so unbelievable that they would become legends across India. The world would come to know him by a single name, Natwarlal.
By the time Natwarlal's reputation as a master forger began spreading through criminal circles, he had already perfected the art of deception. Simple scams no longer excited him. He wanted bigger challenges, cons so unbelievable that no one would think they were possible. Most criminals stole money from banks or businesses. Natwarlal decided he would sell things that didn't belong to him, things that couldn't possibly be sold. And somehow, people believed him. One morning, dressed in an immaculate government-style suit, Natwarlal arrived at a luxury hotel in Delhi. Under a false identity, he introduced himself as a senior government official responsible for managing historical properties. His target was a wealthy foreign businessman who had recently arrived in India seeking investment opportunities. Over several meetings, Natwarlal carefully built trust. He spoke confidently about government policies, economic reforms, and development projects. He carried official-looking files and documents bearing forged seals and signatures. Everything appeared authentic. The businessman became convinced he was dealing with a highly placed bureaucrat. Then came the proposal. Natwarlal lowered his voice and looked around the room. "What I'm about to tell you is confidential." The businessman leaned forward. "The government is considering transferring management rights of certain historical properties to private investors." The foreigner was intrigued. "What kind of properties?" Natwarlal opened a folder and slid several documents across the table. At the top of the page was a name recognized around the world, the Taj Mahal. The businessman stared at the papers in disbelief. "The Taj Mahal?" Natwarlal nodded calmly. "It requires extensive maintenance. The government is exploring private partnerships. Only a handful of investors are being considered." The forged documents looked genuine. There were official stamps, government letterheads, and signatures that appeared authentic. The possibility of controlling one of the world's most famous monuments clouded the man's judgment. After weeks of negotiations, he reportedly handed over a massive sum of money. By the time he realized he had been tricked, Natwarlal had vanished. The con became legendary. But for Natwarlal, it was only the beginning. Instead of hiding after such a daring fraud, he became even more ambitious. If someone could be convinced to buy the Taj Mahal, what else could be sold? The answer, in Natwarlal's mind, was simple: almost anything. Soon, another wealthy buyer found himself sitting across from a seemingly important government representative. This time, the discussion centered on another iconic landmark, the Red Fort. The magnificent Mughal fortress had stood for centuries and served as one of India's most important historical symbols. Yet Natwarlal spoke about it as if it were an ordinary commercial property. "The government wishes to reduce maintenance expenses," he explained. "We are looking for private stakeholders." The buyer examined maps, contracts, and authorization letters. Everything appeared legitimate. Every document had been forged with extraordinary precision. Natwarlal's confidence never wavered. Whenever questions arose, he had answers ready. Whenever doubts appeared, he produced additional paperwork. The buyer eventually agreed to the deal and transferred a substantial amount of money. Once again, Natwarlal disappeared before suspicions could arise. Law enforcement agencies across multiple states were becoming increasingly frustrated. Witness descriptions rarely matched. Some victims described a sophisticated businessman. Others remembered a senior government officer. Some recalled a wealthy industrialist. The problem was that all of them were describing the same person, Natwarlal. His ability to transform himself was extraordinary. He understood that people often remembered appearances more than details. A simple change of hairstyle, glasses, clothing, and mannerisms could create an entirely different identity. He practiced accents from different regions. He altered his posture. He changed the speed at which he spoke. Even experienced investigators struggled to connect his various disguises. Over the years, he reportedly operated under more than 50 different aliases. Each identity had its own backstory, its own documents, its own personality. If authorities searched for one version of Natwarlal, another version would already be conducting business somewhere else. Then came one of the most astonishing stories associated with his name. According to popular accounts, Natwarlal allegedly convinced investors that portions of India's Parliament House could be acquired through a confidential government arrangement. The scheme relied on the same formula that had worked before: authority, secrecy, opportunity, and greed. The investors were shown files filled with official-looking paperwork. Among the documents were forged signatures supposedly belonging to some of the highest offices in the country. Everything was designed to create the illusion of legitimacy. The investors believed they were participating in an exclusive transaction available only to a select few. By the time questions emerged, the money had already changed hands, and Natwarlal was gone. Again. Stories of these incredible scams spread across India like urban legends. Many people found them difficult to believe. How could anyone think that Taj Mahal was for sale? How could someone believe they could purchase the Red Fort or Parliament House? Yet Natwarlal understood something that most people ignored. When greed mixes with secrecy and the promise of extraordinary profit, common sense often disappears. His victims were not always foolish. Many were wealthy, educated, and experienced in business, but they wanted to believe they had discovered a rare opportunity. Natwarlal simply gave them what they wanted to hear. As newspapers began reporting his exploits, his name became famous throughout the country. To some, he was a criminal. To others, he was a folk legend who repeatedly outsmarted powerful people. But law enforcement agencies saw a growing threat. His confidence was increasing with each successful scam. His disguises were becoming more sophisticated, and despite numerous complaints, he continued to evade capture. The game between Natwarlal and the police was about to enter a new phase, one filled with arrests, dramatic escapes, and a nationwide manhunt that would make him one of India's most elusive criminals.
By the 1960s and 1970s, Natwarlal had become far more than a criminal. His name was no longer whispered only in police stations and courtrooms. It was being discussed in tea shops, village squares, railway platforms, and crowded marketplaces across India. Every successful scam added another chapter to his growing legend. To law enforcement agencies, he was a dangerous fraudster who had cheated countless people out of enormous sums of money. But among many ordinary citizens, especially in parts of Bihar, the story was very different. In his hometown and surrounding villages, tales circulated about how Natwarlal would sometimes distribute money among poor families. Whether every story was true or exaggerated over time is difficult to verify, but these accounts helped create an image of him that resembled a modern-day Robin Hood. Villagers claimed he helped struggling farmers pay debts. Others said he donated money for weddings and medical expenses. Some remembered anonymous financial assistance arriving when families faced hardship. As these stories spread, many people began viewing him not as a criminal, but as a folk hero who outsmarted wealthy businessmen and corrupt officials. One elderly villager reportedly told a journalist years later, "People here never believed he was a bad man. They believed he was smarter than everyone else." This public admiration created a major problem for the police.
Whenever officers arrived searching for Natwarlal, they often encountered silence. No one had seen him. No one knew where he was. No one could help. Whether people genuinely knew nothing or deliberately protected him was often impossible to determine. The result was the same. Natwarlal continued to disappear. As his fame grew, so did the number of criminal cases filed against him. Police departments from multiple states opened investigations. Court warrants piled up year after year. Eventually, authorities managed to arrest him. Then they arrested him again, and again, and again. Over the decades, Natwarlal was reportedly arrested more than 100 times. For most criminals, even a handful of arrests would signal the end of their careers. For Natwarlal, arrests became little more than temporary interruptions. Each time police celebrated capturing him, he seemed to find another way back to freedom. Investigators began joking that keeping Natwarlal inside a prison was harder than capturing him. One police officer reportedly remarked, "We know how to arrest him. The real challenge is keeping him there." His reputation as an escape artist grew almost as quickly as his reputation as a con man. One of his most famous incidents occurred in Kanpur. At the time, authorities believed they had finally secured him inside a facility from which escape seemed impossible. The facility was heavily guarded, movement was monitored, visitors were restricted. Officials felt confident. Natwarlal, however, was already studying his surroundings. He spent weeks observing routines, which guards were strict, which guards were careless, who could be influenced, who could not. The same skills he used to deceive businessmen were now being used to study prison staff. Patience was always one of his greatest strengths. Rather than rushing, he waited, and waited, and waited. Then, one day, according to popular accounts, his opportunity arrived. Using charm, manipulation, and reportedly bribery, he managed to gain cooperation from individuals inside the prison system. Soon afterward, a police officer appeared to be walking through the prison grounds. The uniform looked authentic. The mannerisms appeared professional. The confidence was convincing. No one paid much attention. After all, police officers came and went regularly. The figure calmly approached an exit. A guard glanced briefly. Everything seemed normal. The officer continued walking, step by step, closer to freedom. Then he disappeared. Only later did authorities realize the shocking truth. The police officer had not been a police officer. It had been Natwarlal. By the time the alarm was raised, he was already gone. News of the escape spread rapidly. For many citizens, it sounded less like a real event and more like a scene from a movie. Yet it further enhanced his growing myth. Every successful escape made him appear almost untouchable. But his most famous escapes were not limited to prisons. On another occasion, authorities arranged to transport him by train while he was in custody. The plan seemed secure. Officers accompanied him. The route was carefully planned. There appeared to be no possibility of escape. Yet Natwarlal remained calm throughout the journey. He chatted casually with guards. He behaved cooperatively. He gave no indication that he was planning anything unusual. That was exactly what made him dangerous. At some point during the trip, he reportedly began exploiting small weaknesses in the security arrangements, perhaps a moment of distraction, perhaps overconfidence from his escorts, perhaps another carefully executed deception. Whatever the exact sequence of events, the outcome stunned authorities. At a remote railway station, Natwarlal managed to step off the train. By the time officers realized what had happened, precious minutes had already passed. The station was crowded. Passengers moved in every direction. Vendors shouted from platforms. Trains arrived and departed. Within moments, Natwarlal blended into the sea of people. Search teams rushed through the area. Questions were asked. Witnesses were interviewed. But finding him was like searching for a single drop of water in a river. He had vanished once again. The escape became another legendary chapter in his story. Police departments across India grew increasingly frustrated. Every arrest generated headlines. Every escape generated even bigger headlines. The public followed these stories with fascination. Some admired his intelligence. Others condemned the embarrassment he caused law enforcement. But everyone seemed to know his name. By now, Natwarlal was no longer merely a criminal. He had become a national phenomenon, a master of disguise, a genius forger, a conman who allegedly sold monuments, and a prisoner who seemed incapable of staying behind bars. Yet age was slowly catching up with him. The years of running, hiding, deceiving, and escaping were beginning to take their toll. Soon, the most mysterious chapter of his life would begin, a chapter involving his final disappearance, conflicting reports about his fate, and a mystery that remains unsolved to this day.
By the 1980s and 1990s, Natwarlal's name had become the stuff of legend. Newspapers wrote about him, police departments across India maintained files on him, and countless stories circulated about his daring scams and miraculous escapes. Yet what fascinated people most was not the money he stole. It was the way he seemed to outsmart the very institutions designed to stop him. Even when he was finally caught and brought before the courts, Natwarlal often refused to behave like an ordinary defendant. Many accused criminals relied entirely on lawyers. Natwarlal preferred something different. He frequently represented himself. Courtrooms that were supposed to be solemn places of legal proceedings sometimes became stages for his remarkable intelligence and quick wit. Judges, prosecutors, and lawyers quickly discovered that they were dealing with an unusually sharp mind. Natwarlal possessed an impressive understanding of legal procedures. Years spent studying law and observing court systems had taught him how to navigate complex legal arguments. During hearings, he would challenge witnesses, question technical details, point out inconsistencies, and occasionally turn the courtroom's attention away from his crimes and toward lengthy debates about legal procedure. One prosecutor later remarked that questioning Natwarlal was unlike any other criminal. He was calm, confident, and always seemed to have another argument ready. According to numerous accounts, judges were often left both frustrated and amazed by his ability to argue his own cases. At times, spectators attended hearings simply to watch him speak. What should have been straightforward court proceedings sometimes felt like intellectual contests. One day, after a particularly lengthy hearing, a courtroom observer reportedly joked, "It seems everyone here is on trial except Natwarlal." The comment captured a growing reality. Even in custody, he somehow managed to remain in control of the narrative. As criminal cases accumulated over the decades, courts handed down sentence after sentence. Fraud, forgery, cheating, multiple convictions piled up. When the combined punishments from various cases were added together, the total reportedly exceeded 100 years in prison. According to popular accounts, the cumulative sentence reached an astonishing 113 years. For most criminals, such a sentence would effectively mean spending the rest of their lives behind bars. But Natwarlal reacted with amusement. He understood something that everyone else was beginning to realize. A prison sentence only mattered if the prisoner stayed in prison, and Natwarlal had built an entire reputation on doing exactly the opposite. When journalists asked about his convictions, he often appeared remarkably unconcerned. The courts could issue sentences, the police could make arrests, but somehow he always seemed to find another way out. This attitude only strengthened the myths surrounding him. To his critics, it demonstrated arrogance. To his admirers, it reinforced the image of an unstoppable trickster who could outwit anyone. As the years passed, however, time began succeeding where law enforcement had struggled. Natwarlal was growing old. The energetic conman who once traveled across India under dozens of false identities was now an elderly man. His health was deteriorating. The decades of stress, imprisonment, and constant movement were taking a visible toll. Yet even age failed to completely diminish his reputation. Police officers assigned to guard him remained cautious. Many had grown up hearing stories about his escapes. Some even joked that no lock in India was strong enough to hold him. Then came the event that would become the most mysterious chapter of his life. In 1996, Natwarlal was approximately 84 years old. His health had reportedly worsened significantly, and authorities arranged for him to receive medical treatment. Under police supervision, he was transported in New Delhi for hospital care. At first, everything appeared routine. The aging prisoner seemed weak. His physical condition gave little reason for concern. Few people imagined that an elderly man requiring medical attention could still pose a serious escape risk. That assumption would prove costly. At some point during the transfer process, confusion emerged. Exactly what happened next remains disputed. Some accounts suggest security became lax because of his age. Others indicate there were failures in coordination among the officers responsible for guarding him. What everyone agrees on is the outcome. Natwarlal disappeared once again. Despite being under police custody, despite his advanced age, despite decades of criminal investigations, India's most famous conman had somehow slipped away. The news stunned the country. Television channels and newspapers quickly picked up the story. Many people hardly could believe it. An 84-year-old man had apparently escaped from police supervision. Yet those familiar with Natwarlal's history were less surprised. After all, escaping custody had become one of his trademarks. Search efforts followed. Investigators attempted to trace his movements. Police questioned relatives, associates, and potential contacts. But the trail quickly went cold. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, months turned into years. No confirmed sightings emerged. No arrests were made. No definitive answers appeared. It was as though Natwarlal had simply vanished from the world. Then, years later, another mystery surfaced. Members of his family claimed that he had died in 2009. According to them, the legendary conman had finally passed away after living a long and extraordinary life. For many observers, the announcement seemed plausible. If he were alive, he would have been extremely old. The announcement seemed to provide a logical conclusion. But not everyone agreed. In a twist that seemed perfectly suited to Natwarlal's legend, his own lawyer reportedly challenged the claim. The lawyer suggested that there was no definitive proof of death and maintained that Natwarlal might have escaped once again. The statement reignited public fascination. Had he truly died? Had his family secretly performed his funeral? Or had India's greatest conman somehow staged one final disappearance? No one could say with certainty. Even today, the truth remains unclear. There is no universally accepted account of his final years, no confirmed explanation for his disappearance, no definitive answer to the question that has intrigued people for decades. What happened to Natwarlal? Did he die quietly in obscurity, or did he succeed in pulling off one final trick? The mystery remains unsolved. And perhaps that is the most fitting ending possible for a man who spent his entire life making reality and illusion impossible to distinguish.
The disappearance of Natwarlal in 1996 only deepened the mystery surrounding his life. Years passed without a confirmed sighting. Police files remained open. Journalists continued investigating, and rumors spread across India about where he might be hiding. But as time went on, the focus gradually shifted from the man himself to the extraordinary legacy he left behind. By then, Natwarlal had become more than a criminal. He had become a legend. One of the most frequently repeated stories about him involved his personal philosophy regarding fraud. According to popular accounts, Natwarlal often claimed that he did not target innocent people. Instead, he said he preferred victims whose own greed made them vulnerable. In his view, many of the wealthy businessmen, investors, and speculators he cheated were attempting to gain unfair advantages themselves. Whether this was a genuine belief or simply a convenient way to justify his crimes remains a matter of debate. But the statement became an important part of his legend. During conversations with journalists and acquaintances, he reportedly suggested that his victims ignored common sense because they were blinded by the promise of easy money. They wanted something for nothing, he allegedly argued. In his mind, he was not merely stealing, he was teaching a lesson, a harsh lesson, one that cost his victims dearly. Of course, law enforcement officials strongly rejected this narrative. To them, fraud was fraud, regardless of the victim's motivations. Courts repeatedly convicted him because his schemes involved deception, forgery, and financial loss on a massive scale. Yet the myth persisted. For many people, Natwarlal occupied a strange space between criminal and folk hero. His story became one of the most unusual examples of how public perception can differ from legal reality. Beyond the legends and rumors, however, his activities had a very real impact on India. For decades, Natwarlal exploited weaknesses in administrative systems. He forged signatures, created counterfeit documents, imitated government officials, manipulated verification procedures. Again and again, he exposed vulnerabilities that many institutions did not realize existed. As authorities studied his methods, government departments began implementing stricter safeguards. Document authentication procedures became more rigorous. Verification systems improved. Official paperwork underwent greater scrutiny. Banks strengthened internal controls. Government offices introduced additional layers of confirmation before approving important transactions. His crimes highlighted a simple but important truth. A system is only as secure as its ability to verify identity and authenticity. In an indirect way, the very scams that embarrassed authorities also pushed institutions to modernize and improve their security measures. As the years passed, Natwarlal's influence extended far beyond police records and court documents. He entered Indian popular culture. Writers, filmmakers, and journalists found his life impossible to ignore. His story contained everything needed for compelling storytelling: mystery, adventure, humor, escapes, disguises, and seemingly impossible scams. Numerous books explored his exploits. Television programs revisited his most famous cons. Documentaries attempted to separate fact from myth. Perhaps most significantly, his legend inspired characters and stories in Indian cinema, including the famous film Mr. Natwarlal, which helped cement the name in the public imagination. With each passing decade, the line between history and folklore became increasingly blurred. Some stories were well documented. Others grew larger with every retelling. People debated whether he truly sold the Taj Mahal multiple times, whether every jailbreak happened exactly as described, whether he really escaped custody as an elderly man, and whether he actually died when his family claimed he did. The uncertainty only made the legend stronger. Unlike most criminals whose stories end with an arrest or death, Natwarlal's story never received a universally accepted conclusion. There was no final chapter, only questions. Even today, his name remains part of everyday language in India. When someone successfully tricks others through intelligence and deception, people often compare them to Natwarlal. The name itself has become a symbol, not merely of fraud, but of extraordinary cunning. Generations who know little about the details of his life still recognize what the word means. A Natwarlal is someone clever enough to fool almost anyone. That cultural impact is perhaps more remarkable than any individual scam he ever pulled off. Most criminals are eventually forgotten. Natwarlal was not. Decades after his disappearance, people continued discussing him in newspapers, documentaries, books, and online forums. Historians examine the facts. Journalists investigate the myths. Storytellers retell the legends. And somewhere between those facts and legends stands the mysterious figure of Mithilesh Kumar Srivastava, better known as Natwarlal. The boy from Bihar who mastered forgery, the conman who allegedly sold India's most famous monuments, the escape artist who repeatedly slipped through the hands of police, the outlaw who became folklore. Whether he died quietly in old age or vanished into history through one final deception may never be known. But one thing is certain: Natwarlal remains the most famous conman India has ever produced, a ghost-like figure whose story continues to fascinate generations long after he disappeared.